By morning, their throats were raw, the kind of raw that made swallowing feel like dragging glass down your esophagus. Every breath caught on something dry and bitter. When Nick opened the tent flap to call for water, his voice came out thin, cracked. The others stirred, coughing, the kind of sick, deep coughing that sounded wrong after a single night in the woods. There was no smoke in the air, and yet, a fine layer of ash covered everything. Their sleeping bags, the tent floor. The outer tarp shimmered under the early sunlight, dusted like a burnt pastry. Even the leaves outside the clearing wore a chalky veil. It clung to their boots when they stepped out. It clung to their tongues. The air smelled neutral. No soot, no char. Just the cold breath of the forest. There'd been no fire. The campfire from last night had barely caught, just a few small branches and a handful of matches. Enough to toast marshmallows and talk about ghost stories. No wind, no sparks flying. Off. They'd gone to sleep around midnight, the flames already fading to coal. The fire pit this morning was cold, undisturbed, but the ash was. Everywhere they checked the ridge above the clearing. No burn scars, no distant column of smoke. The forest stretched outward, damp with summer dew and silence. Nick's phone was the only one with service. He pulled up the satellite map. The National Park Ranger Station was 20 miles out, too far to walk before nightfall. They had food, water, gear. Nothing felt urgent, just strange. Like waking up in the wrong house, with everything still in the right place. James found the trail camera around noon. It had been mounted high on a pine tree near the edge of the clearing, not one of theirs. No one remembered setting it up. The casing was scratched, old, but intact. The strap had sunk deep into the bark, like it had been there for weeks. No markings, no name, just a blinking red light, still recording. They brought it down and plugged it into Nick's laptop. The first half of the footage was static. Nothing but time-stamped emptiness, black and gray flickers. Around 2:43 a.m., a figure appeared. Not from the trail, not from the trees, just standing. It was tall, angular, Onum. It stood just beyond the range of the dead campfire, arms at its sides. Head tilted slightly upward, as if watching the smoke that wasn't there. None of them had woken. No footsteps had been heard. No voices. At 3:27 a.m., the figure turned, not walked, just pivoted and stepped backward, out of frame. The recording ended at 4 a.m., right before dawn that night. They didn't relight the fire. They sat inside, the tent with headlamps off, listening to the wind scrape through the trees like sandpaper on old bones. They couldn't stop licking the backs of their teeth, tasting the ash that still wasn't there. They buried the trail camera beneath a pile of stones. James said it felt wrong to leave it out, as if it could keep recording, even without power. The blinking red light had stopped the moment they unplugged it. But something about it, the way it was angled, the stillness of the figure in the recording, felt like a door had been opened just by watching it. No, one wanted to review the footage again. Nick tried deleting the file, but the folder glitched out and wouldn't close. The laptop screen froze on a still image. The pale clearing, the thing in the dark, face blurred, limbs too long. They shut the laptop and left it zipped in the backpack. That day, they stuck close to camp, barely speaking. A steady unease had settled over the group, like the air before a lightning strike, the kind that raises the hairs on your arms and makes animals disappear into the brush. They noticed the birds were gone yesterday. The woods had been filled with chirping and wing beats. This morning, silence, even the flies had vanished. The only noise came from the wind, but it was off-tempo, blowing through the leaves in a stutter, like breath catching in a dry throat. Around mid-afternoon, James spotted something strange. In the tree line, a small blackened patch on a distant pine, like someone had scorched the bark with a torch. But it wasn't burnt, it was damp. The bark wept a slow tar-like substance, and within the dripping pattern there was a shape, a smudge in the form of a handprint, too long, too thin. Later, as dusk thickened, they lit a small fire again, just a few sticks, enough to cook. They noticed the smoke didn't rise. It hovered, shifting sideways through the clearing like fog. When Nick stood up and walked a few feet, the smoke followed him, subtly, but real. Wherever he stood, it drifted toward his chest. He didn't say anything, just sat back down and stared into the flame that night. The ash returned, heavier this time. It dusted their sleeping bags before they fell asleep. It collected in their hair, their nostrils. They woke choking again, coughing up black flecks that clung to their teeth. When they spat into the dirt, the spit steamed faintly as if overheated from inside. The forest smelled faintly of burning pine. There had been no fire. Nick unzipped the tent around 3 a.m. He couldn't sleep. His tongue felt thick. The wind had stopped. The clearing was unnaturally still. In the center of their extinguished fire pit, something was standing. No sound, no movement, just presence. It didn't turn toward him, didn't move. But somehow, in the way the shadows bent, he knew it saw him. By morning, the tent was full of ash dot. Not a dusting, not a thin film, but piles. The kind you'd expect after a building burned to the ground. It lay heavy in their boots, their packs, inside water bottles that had been sealed the night before. The fire pit outside was untouched, still cold, still ringed with damp stone. But something had burned, and it had chosen them. The sky above was clear, not a cloud. No trace of fire in the region, no alerts, no planes overhead. Just sun and silence, and the feeling that the trees had pulled back a few inches farther than the day before. They tried to leave. Nick led the way, following the GPS out of the clearing and toward the ranger station. The trail was familiar at first. Muddy switchbacks, moss-covered rocks, the same crooked marker they'd passed on the way in. But after an hour, the path looped. The trees repeated themselves, a split-trunk pine, a log shaped like a crouched animal, a cluster of mushrooms like a melted skull, then again, and again. By the fourth loop, they stopped pretending it was coincidence. The forest wasn't letting them go. When they returned to the clearing, it had changed. The tents were gone, so were the bags. The fire pit was deeper, wider, dug out by something with purpose. In the center, not wood or coals, but a mass of hardened ash, shaped into a dome. From within, faint threads of smoke still curled upward like breath from a sleeping mouth. It had been built while they were gone. James began to shake. He stepped forward, against the other's silent panic, and pushed his hand into the mound. It cracked, not like dried mud, but like brittle bone, and released a sudden plume of heatless smoke that surrounded them instantly in it. Nick saw them, figures, dozens, just silhouettes watching, standing still, like mannequins arranged between the trees. They were the same shape as the one from the trail camera. They didn't move, but the smoke pulsed with a rhythm, not wind, not fire, a breath. A slow, steady inhalation. Nick's vision blurred. His teeth hurt. He felt something pressed gently behind his eyes, as if memorizing the shape of his skull from within. Then, everything went dark. When he opened his eyes, it was night. They were outside the tree line, near the ranger station parking lot. His body ached. His mouth was dry. James and the others were there, but none of them spoke. The ash was gone. The forest behind them looked ordinary. Smaller, distant, inside. His pack, the one that had vanished the trail camera, was sitting on top. No damage, just one file inside. A video unmarked. He hit play. It showed the three of them sleeping. Then sitting up, blank-eyed, stepping out of the tent one by one, walking toward the center of the clearing, kneeling around the fire pit, digging with their hands, not speaking, building something, then standing, perfectly still, as a fourth shape rose behind them. Tall, thin, featureless, breathing. I've worked with abandoned infrastructure for years. Weather stations, collapsed repeater masts, old Cold War bunkers. But the tower in the Stone Creek Reserve was different. Not because of how it looked, but because of how it sounded, or didn't the signal had gone silent 7 years earlier? Funding was pulled. The ranger stations were shut down. The tower was left to rot. But the structure still stood. 40 feet of steel lattice climbing above the black pine. One blinking, red light at the top. Still operational, strangely. I was sent in alone. A single technician, just to run a final test on the antenna array before its scheduled demolition. The site was too remote for easy access, so I was dropped off with a snowmobile and a long-wave scanner. The snow came heavier than expected that week, and by the time I arrived at the clearing, the trees had sealed behind me like curtains. There were no animal tracks, no birds, just the skeleton of the tower rising against a dim gray sky. The small cabin at its base still had power, solar mostly. No heat, but the radio bench lit up when I flipped the switch. The spectrum analyzer showed nothing, pure static. The air was dead, until it wasn't. At 2:13 a.m., I was half asleep on the floor in my sleeping bag when I heard it. A whisper, cutting through the white noise like a knife. It said my name, not loudly, not clearly, but unmistakably. Just once, I sat up, scanned the gear. The analyzer was still blank. I swept the UHF band. Nothing. FM, AM dead. I told myself it was a dream. The result of static triggering the brain's pattern recognition in the silence. Audio pareidolia, sleep paralysis. I had answers, all of them rational. But it said my name again the next night. Longer this time. A soft intake of breath before it. And after, I stopped sleeping. I disassembled the receiver, checked every contact, replaced the batteries, even grounded myself to the frame of the tower. But it didn't help. The whisper didn't care about the equipment. It came at random, always, just out of sync with anything measurable. On the third night, I turned the analyzer to max gain and recorded the spectrum feed into a backup laptop. I ran a waterfall trace, over and over. That's when I saw it. A shape, not a voice print exactly, but something like it. A repeating waveform that resembled a mouth. Open, closed, open, closed. It looked like it was trying to speak. The cabin was cold. My breath fogged the inside of my goggles. But I stayed perfectly still, watching that signal pulse in absolute silence. Not transmitted, not received. Just there, like it had been waiting. Outside, the tower groaned. Wind moved through, its hollow rungs like a throat clearing. Then I heard it again, my name. Only this time, it wasn't from the radio. It was from the top of the tower. I didn't climb the tower that night. I didn't even go outside. I sat perfectly still inside the cabin, every light off, my headset coiled in my lap. I waited with my back against the equipment rack until the pale blue dawn began to stain. The snow, the red light at the top of the tower kept blinking. It hadn't stopped once since I arrived. I wanted to leave. Radioed command for early pickup. No reply. Weather had worsened. No signal in or out. The snowmobile was buried halfway, up the seat, frozen solid. I couldn't even dig out the ignition before the metal started sticking to my gloves. I thought about walking, but it was 14 miles of terrain in every direction, and there were no trails anymore. Only the tower, only the cabin, only me. That day, the whisper didn't come, but the silence changed. I began to notice sounds that weren't quite real. A low hiss beneath the static, a buzz just outside the range of hearing. I swept every band I could think of, tried to triangulate sources. Nothing matched. Frequencies jumped, blurred. Every once in a while, the spectrum analyzer would catch a blip. Always in the same range. Around 447.3 megahertz, a dead frequency. No known transmitters. No licensed beacons. I set the recorder again, pointed it directly at the antenna patch in the roof, and played it back in slow motion. The sound that came through wasn't a voice this time. It was breathing, not ambient wind, not audio drift. It was rhythmic, wet, too close to the mic. I checked the gear twice. My headset had been unplugged during the recording. I tried to sleep that night, but woke to a vibration through the floor. A low hum, rising and falling, like a transformer charging. I stepped outside with my parka zipped and looked up at the tower. The blinking red light had stopped, and in its place, I saw something faintly glowing. Not a bulb, not metal. It looked like a shape half obscured behind the rusted steel struts. Something hunched, still perched, just below the top platform. I blinked, and it was gone. No movement, no sound. Only frost biting at the corners of my mouth and the antenna wire humming slightly in the wind. The next morning, I climbed. I told myself it was to inspect the obstruction, to make sure it wasn't a fallen panel or ice buildup. But as my boots crunched up the steel rungs, I knew the real reason. It wasn't logic that made me climb. It was the need to know, the need to see what had been whispering. Halfway up, the signal came back. Not in my headset, in my ears. The same whisper, the same voice, but now it was inside my skull. Under my thoughts, it repeated my name, slower now, dragging each syllable. As though tasting it, I reached the top platform, shaking. There was nothing there, only snow. Ice crusted over the railing. The antennae hung silent above, black against the pale sky. I stood for a long time, staring down at the cabin below. My footprints were the only ones in the snow. The forest stretched endless in every direction. Then I noticed the hatch, a small square panel bolted into the center of the platform floor. I hadn't seen it on the blueprints. There were no tools with me, but I didn't need them. The bolts were already loosened. Someone or something had already opened it. The hatch opened inward, not upward. Its hinges let out no sound, as though they'd been greased recently, despite the rust. Beneath it was a ladder, narrow and steep, descending into the central shaft of the tower. There shouldn't have been a hollow core. The original engineering notes I'd reviewed back at HQ had no mention of internal access past the top platform. And yet, the shaft stretched down into a darkness that wasn't just shadow. It absorbed light. I stared down for a long time, long enough that the cold stopped biting, and something else took over, the sense that I wasn't alone. That something below was waiting for me to notice it. I climbed down anyway. The rungs were iced but sturdy. I moved slowly, one boot at a time, the wind above growing fainter with every meter. After maybe 20 feet, I reached a floor, concrete, bare cold as a morgue slab. And the moment my boots touched it, I felt it, the vibration, a pulse beneath the soles of my feet. Like something deep below was breathing, exhaling slowly through the foundation of the tower. Ahead of me was a narrow corridor, metallic, lit by small red bulbs recessed in the ceiling. The walls weren't rusted, they were clean, smooth, lined with what looked like speakers or microphones embedded in regular intervals, facing inward. The air was wrong, still but electric. Then I heard it again, my name, whispered in a voice just like mine. I turned, the ladder was gone. No, not gone. The tunnel had rotated, somehow, shifted behind me. The way back was no longer visible. Just another red-lit hallway extending behind me, identical in every way to the one ahead. The voice repeated, still whispering, then laughing, then gasping, like a mouth learning how to speak for the first time. I started walking. The corridor kept going. No turns, no doors, just microphones. I began to hear fragments, words I'd spoken earlier in the cabin, then things I'd thought but hadn't said. My thoughts echoed back to me with a half-second delay, layered over themselves like a chorus of failing tape recorders. Then it said something else, something I never thought. A string of words in no language I knew, guttural, wet, foreign, and wrong. Every microphone in the corridor buzzed as if responding. The lights flickered, then silence, and ahead of me, a new sound, feet not walking, dragging, one after another, coming toward me, slow, heavy, no breathing, no voice, just a growing presence in the dark. I turned and ran. The corridor didn't end. The red lights dimmed behind me, flickered ahead, and still, the dragging continued. Always behind me, never. Faster than me, but never falling behind either, like it knew I couldn't escape. Then the whisper returned. But this time, it wasn't calling my name. It was repeating my thoughts, a second behind, exactly word for word. I turned and ran, ... The corridor didn't end, ... The red lights dimmed, ... Like it knew I couldn't escape, ... double quotes. I stopped, covered my ears. The voice kept speaking, not into my ears, but from inside my skull. A broadcast with no origin, a transmission made of me. Then I saw the door, just one steel, bolted with a mechanical wheel lock, painted on it in red, smeared by hand. To listen is to obey. I didn't open it. I don't know how I got back. I woke up in the snow beneath the tower, with a splitting headache and blood frozen on my lips. The cabin was dark. The analyzer fried. The radio melted from the inside. The hatch above was sealed again, solid, as if it had never opened. The red light on top of the tower blinked quietly overhead. I was picked up 2 days later, delirious and frostbitten. They asked what happened. I didn't answer. I've been hearing things since, not always voices. Sometimes it's just the echo of a thought, a half second after I think it. And sometimes, when I tune the static just right, I hear your name.